Okay, today I'm talking to Paul Doherty, Group Chief Executive for Technology and Chief Technology Officer at Accenture, about his new book, Radically Human: How New Technology is Transforming Business and Shaping Our Future. First of all, thank you so much. I have my advanced copy here as well. I feel super blessed to have had the opportunity to read it, and I really enjoyed it. So maybe we could start by exploring what motivated you and your co-author Jim Wilson to write this follow-on book to Human Plus Machine, and who this book is aimed at.
No, thanks, Bernard, for having me. And I'm really pleased to be talking about Radically Human. And The origin of the book was, it came after Human Plus Machine, as you just said, and we were really pleased with the reaction to Human Plus Machine and the idea. We wrote Human Plus Machine because we wanted to correct the narrative that we heard back then. This is 4 or 5 years ago, that that all the jobs were going to be destroyed, and that AI and technology was going to be bad, have this bad effect on humans. And we wanted to set the narrative straight by talking about the human plus machine future, the right way for us as leaders and technologists and business people to shape that future. And the reaction was great. And we've seen the narrative change around people embracing that human plus machine view. And then where Radically Human came in is when we looked at that and looked at how fast some of the trends were advancing. Some things were moving even faster than we thought, and we wanted to write Radically Human to talk about where this is really going and broaden the dialogue.
Mhm.
Whereas Human Plus Machine talked, more specifically about artificial intelligence, we're broadening the lens and talking about other implications that we see from a technology landscape, and why, for the future, we believe that if you think about the intersection of technology and human ingenuity, put together the best of humans and the best of technology, which is what we talk about in human plus machine. When you really put that together the right way, that it's creating radically human capability and potential, and that's what we're writing about in the book.
Very good. So what taking into account that it builds on Human Plus Machine, what's new and noteworthy that you cover in Radically Human?
Yeah, it's all it's really a whole new set of research that we did for this, and it's fundamentally new way of thinking about how you take your business into the future. That's what we're trying to put in here. It's kind of a roadmap to thinking about how to get to this radically human future. So the research that we did was highlighted some interesting things. One of which was that we started this research just before COVID, and before COVID, the research highlighted that digital leaders were outpacing laggards by a
Mm.
factor of 2x. So digital leaders outperforming the rest by the laggards by 2x. And then COVID happened, and everything got thrown up into the air. And as you know, some things accelerated, some things got set back. So we redid the research, and we were frankly surprised by the results. And this is right as we're writing the book, and it came back and said that COVID, as a result of COVID, um, the leaders were still ahead, but they were the gap had widened to 5x. So because technology was the lifeline during COVID, and those that were more advanced in using technology, the more advanced digital companies, were outpacing the rest even more. And we also identified a category of leapfroggers. This is about 15% of companies that were dramatically accelerating and flipping the table by focusing more on innovation to leapfrog the rest. So you have 10% of leaders and about 15% of leapfroggers that were really setting themselves apart. And then looking at how those companies operated, it really validated a lot of the ideas we had for Radically Human, and became became what we studied to look at the framework. And we came up with a framework that we called the ideas framework. It's 5 things that we believe are essential, to get right. It's about the future. It's about intelligence is the I, data, expertise, architecture, and strategies. Those are 5 things to get right, and we're really flipping the conventional wisdom a bit on each one of those. And we so we Jim, my co-author, and I talk about the big flip in assumptions that you need to take with the ideas framework to to get to the future in a different way. And that's what we're laying out for people, is how to reframe some of their assumptions and think differently about how to get to the future along the ideas dimensions.
Great. So can you take us through this ideas framework and maybe give us some examples for each of the stages?
Yeah. No, the maybe start with the first one, which is intelligence, where we talk about making making AI more human and less artificial. And this is maybe the bridge, so to speak, to human plus machine. And what we're talking about here is new, is how to apply AI in a way that's more human, which enhances human potential and capability, and using new forms of AI that are kind of more powerful as well and have more human-like capabilities. So it's combining the two ideas, and so there's new techniques that we talk about in here, like common sense AI.
Mm.
We talk about emotional AI a bit in here as well, that can better, where the AI itself, the systems themselves can have more human capabilities. And some may say, well, isn't that a bad thing? There are, but that's again what we talked about in human plus machine. That's a good thing, because if the technology has a more human interface, it can help us be more effective in using it and can solve more of the problems and help us solve problems more effectively. So that's what we're talking about in intelligence. We talk about a manufacturer in there, an electronics. It's actually electronics wholesaler we talk about, called Obeta. And the way they use AI, and they use AI from a company called Covariant, to help human workers assemble the goods that they need to ship more effectively. And it's an interface between the humans and robots, that's powered by this human-like artificial intelligence, where the workers can help guide the robotic equipment to package and deliver the equipment in the right way. So it's really again a fusion, like we talked about in human plus machine, of those skills to deliver that kind of impact. And the message here is that there's new forms of AI coming along continuously that you can capitalize on as a company to help you do these things more effectively.
Very good. And the other parts of the framework?
Yeah, so data is an interesting one. This one is a surprising one, and the good thing about any book is to be a little bit provocative, and you can have some good discussions and debate. So with data, where all the focus has been on big data, and with data, what we're talking about is sometimes it's the small data that makes a difference. So the subtitle of this part of the book is from maximum to minimum, and then back again, and the point is that, yes, big data is important. Everybody's building their data lakes and these massive transformer models with billions of parameters. Those things serve a purpose, but that's not where it's all at. And for many organizations, and for many things that companies need to do, the small data could be what makes the biggest difference for you. And the trends in technology are leading this direction. Given what's what's happening in the world, and more technology being pushed to the edge, and more pervasive operational technology, more devices extended, more AI is going to need to, more algorithms are going to need to run on the edge, not back in your centralized data lakes and things, which is going to require, again, figuring out how do you filter the right data and use the techniques for that filtering, using new techniques like dynamic filtering as an example. And how do you apply algorithms at the edge to decide, for that device what to do, at that point of need, rather than going back and forth to your data center or cloud environment. There's also new techniques in here, like few shot learning. And we talk about training these massive using massive data sets to train algorithms. Well, there's new techniques like few shot learning, because there's some things where you might only need an image or two to train an algorithm to do the right thing. And understanding these techniques of few shot learning, which might be more applicable in some of your processes than big data learning algorithms. And by the way, they're much easier, easier to develop and consume a lot less computing capability, have a lot less carbon impact, et cetera, are important for you to understand as well. So those are the types of things we talk about in this area. And one of the interesting companies we talk about is Wayfair, and how they use these types of techniques in their suggestion and recommendation algorithms to much more effectively and quickly get the right recommendations to customers in real time.
Very good. And the E part of your ideas framework?
Yeah, he's an interesting one too. It's expertise, and it's about moving from machine learning, with algorithms learning to machine teaching, where people are teaching machines. And we talk about three types of expertise that humans have that really need to be conveyed, to machines, and these are get to new roles and new ways of people working with the technology and this radically human type of approach. There's professional expertise, which is, really ingrained knowledge you've gained over a long period of time. There's collective experience, like the hive, wisdom of the crowd type of expertise, and then there's personal expertise, what and judgment that you may have, and all those forms of expertise are important to think about. As you design systems and you design processes, how do you leverage the radically human expertise in the right way to direct what you do. And that's the one of the examples we talk about in the book, just to make this more concrete. In the professional expertise category, we talk about Etsy, the online marketplace, and how they've used this idea around professional expertise to systemize the idea of design aesthetics. So design is very important to Etsy if you've used it, and design and categorization of things is really important. And they've used this idea of machine teaching to use professionals who understand design aesthetics to more effectively bake that into what they do in their online marketplace.
Yeah, fascinating. And then we've got the A part of your ideas framework.
Yeah, architecture, and this is one for all the technologists, I guess, but it matters to the leaders as well. And I find I spend a lot more time today talking to CEOs and even boards about architecture and
Mm.
detailed technology architecture decisions than I ever have, because the point of this architecture trend, or architecture chapter, which is titled From Legacy to Living Systems, is you need to make very careful decisions on how you build your future state architecture, because if you make the wrong decision, it may inhibit what you can do as a business. And we talk about a number of examples in the book, but the idea is, how do you create more flexible systems? It's about some concepts that are not necessarily new, microservices and APIs and the like, but how do you develop that in a way where it's more a living system? It can live and evolve, more of a biological type of view of the system than the static layered view of architecture. And we talk about moving from a layered view to more of a biological living systems view of the way that you view your architecture. And I think of companies, you can use the COVID experience to look at how companies needed this idea of living systems. One of the examples we talk about is Starbucks, who during the COVID crisis, what did they do? They had a mobile app already. They had a flexible architecture. They were able to push out a new app with new capabilities. It had microservices. They could partner with DoorDash and Uber Eats and other services to deliver new delivery and other experiences to customers on how to use their products. They extended the online ordering to be 90% of their ordering. All that was done extremely quickly because of the flexible architecture and technology foundation that enabled them to do that.
Very good. And the last one is strategy. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, this is the one. There's always a surprise when you write a book. we didn't go into this intending to talk about strategy. This kind of emerged as we were looking at the patterns we saw, and so this was kind of the discovery process of the research and writing the book. We kind of realized that there's different pathways on strategy for those what I talked about earlier, that the leaders and leapfroggers that were finding their way forward in a better way. And so we talk about these new strategies we talk about three new ones, and we named them creatively so people would remember them. Forever Beta is the first. This is a business strategies, not technology strategies. Forever Beta is the first. MVI, minimum viable ideas. I'll talk about that in a minute. And then CoLab. Yeah, CoLab. And it's not just collaboration, it's co-lab, lab being science, is the idea there. And those are three strategies that we talk about. I think this is important because you do need to think about strategy differently in this radically human era. You can't think about the business strategy the way you did in the past. You don't have multiple years to execute a strategy, and you can't think about the business strategy separate than technology. And that's the point we're making. Just to give you an example, Forever Beta, we talked about Tesla. And the Tesla, the car is never done. There's new software updates, changing characteristics, changing the clearance of all the Tesla cars in real time. If as as they did when they had one of their early incidents, and continually upgrading and changing. And it's not just the technical features of the car; it's the way that the whole business operates from that they build it out. And that forever beta as a strategy is more and more important to companies in this platform-driven, digital, radically human world we're moving into. The other one I'll just touch on is collab, because this is about collaboration is one part of it, but it's co-lab, because we're talking about science coming together with the technology strategy. We talk about Moderna as an example, in this one, and how Moderna was able to so rapidly innovate using new technologies. A drug design studio using convolutional neural networks powered by public cloud capability to rapidly innovate on a messenger RNA vaccine, because the science combined with the technology, the scientists combined with the technologists to allow that to happen was, the foundation of how they were building their processes and such. And that's another strategy that we think is more and more relevant in the future, given how much technology is disrupting and changing the way science is done, and the science is the foundation of so many industries.
Very good. Do you see this ideas framework being applied sequentially, or do you take all of the components at the same time and look at your strategy?
I think I would recommend you do think of it all at the same time, and then there's parts of it, like any other plan. When you put the plan to action, you need to choose which pieces to do at what point in time. I think the strategy is really important to consider as you start and frame what you're doing, and then the rest of the ideas pieces are all important to consider. And then you need to decide in your environment, where do you start? Do you start with the architecture because of what you need to enable, or is it with the data? These are questions that every company faces.
Another really interesting part of the book zeroes in on sustainability and how advancements in technology need to walk hand in hand with the way our world is changing, and we're trying to combat climate change. You talk about how everything from the cloud to electric vehicles can really contribute to this, along with applying AI and moving it from red to green. Can you expand on this a little?
Yeah, it's a really important point, and this is again something that again we knew this was a topic we wanted to cover going into the book, but we got really interesting as we dug into it, and we saw how integral this was to Radically Human. So the headline is that about 10 years ago, technology emissions globally were about 4% of total emissions, and that's moved up to something like 6%, I think, now, and projected to be up to 14% by 2040. And that would be disastrous if that's to happen, and it would be counter to every move we need to make as a society in reducing emissions. So as a call to action of turning turning technology from red to green, because technology is red in terms of its impact. It's burning carbon. In fact, there used to be a phrase in Silicon Valley, which was burn as much silicon as you can, because hardware's inexpensive and software is where it's at. That philosophy needs to change to be, to drive around efficiency. The last 0.1% of precision you drive in your deep learning model could use 3 or 4 times the carbon capacity. And do you need that precision? And is the trade-off worth it? And such. So those are the types of questions we're asking and things we're looking at in the sustainability sense of sustainability piece of Radically Human. And I think those are important choices. We don't have all the answers in there, because I think the answers aren't obvious yet in terms of all the things we need to do here. But there's some things that are clear. Generally speaking, moving to the hyperscaler clouds tends to be more carbon efficient than the data centers companies operate in by a good stretch, and we show some of the data on that in the book. There's other forms around green IT. We formed something called the Green Software Foundation. We launched it with Microsoft and GitHub and a number of other organizations, and it's an open source foundation to everybody collecting their best ideas on green IT. And one of the things is just basic device management, and shutting off screens more has a massive impact when you look at the energy they consume. And other simple things like choice of programming language matters. Python consumes a lot more compute than Java does, things like that. So again, not saying everybody should change programming languages overnight, but these need to be considered more in
Mm.
the development process than we consider them today.
Very good. Yeah, hugely important. Finally, let's talk little bit about the important topic of technology and trust. In the book, you argue that capitalism runs on trust, and that trust is probably our most radically human instinct.
Yeah.
You also talk about the 5 essentials of trust in the digital age. Can you give us an overview of what you mean here, and maybe briefly summarize these 5 essentials?
Yeah, I trust is yeah, thank you for asking the question because trust is just so essential to radically human and to getting this all right. And so we go into a lot of depth on this in that chapter. And it's at the heart of a lot of that's the heart of a lot of the things that I've always done. I think this trust point is really an important thing that we need to tackle as an industry. And the 5 principles we talk about in terms of how to build the trust are around humanity, fairness, transparency, privacy, and security, which all sound like good things, but they're the really thinking about those carefully is what and how do you build on those to really have the outcome be trust with your consumers, trust with your stakeholders, trust with your employees, which is critical in the digital age we're in the radically human era going forward. And I think about it as like a Maslow's hierarchy in some respect. You got to build from the foundation. So it starts with security. If you can't
Mm.
secure customers information or an employee's information, you're never going to have trust. It starts with security, then it's privacy about do you use it appropriately, not share it with the wrong people. Then it's transparency, so people trust how you're going to use the information. Then it's about fairness of are you using the information to to deliver fair outcomes rather than biased outcomes, or having biased algorithms and such, or making decisions that have bias in them,
Mm.
by virtue of the algorithms you use. And then finally, is it human in terms of of its impact? So you kind of have to build these up. And I think you need to evaluate, a company needs to evaluate every process you have and how you use data at every stage of every process to make sure you're building this trust in using these 5 essentials in the way that I described.
Excellent. So if you said these are my top takeaways that people should take away from your book, what would those be?
I think it's challenge your thinking on the five the assumptions that we talk about, the ideas framework, and challenge the assumption. Look at each one of those, and challenge your thinking on how you're approaching it because you may end up with a different result. That's the first message I'd say. And again, the other would be, we are moving to the future where it's about human potential and human talent. I really, for as much as I've talked about technology as part of this, the human potential is going to be the biggest differentiator for organizations going forward. And that human ingenuity will be your biggest differentiator. And are you really thinking about that as you're designing, every part of your company? And again, that's what we're trying to ground back to in the ideas framework is how do you make sure you come out with human potential being maximized and human ingenuity being at the core. And then if you do that and you put that human ingenuity together, with the technology, you're going to have an unbeatable formula that's going to be the radically human formula that's going to guide you to success.
Very good. So what are your hopes and predictions of how people will use the ideas in your book?
I hope businesses embrace it immediately. To set themselves on this course, from a radically human perspective. And I think it's useful information and a guide that'll help any company take their business forward and not just do things differently, but be more innovative, be more competitive, be more human in their approach in terms of the trust they're generating with their customers and employees and other stakeholders. As I said, I think it's also hopefully something that can be a guide to people reading it. People are interested in their own skills